Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to poker tournament strategy. Now here's your host, Clayton Fletcher.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Thinking Poker Podcast. I'm your host, Clayton Fletcher, here in New York City, and I have an all-time favorite guest joining me today, a good friend of mine, someone that I've actually played a lot of poker with, talked even more poker with, and someone that actually probably needs no introduction at this point. He's one of our TPE coaches and a friend of the podcast, Andrew Brokos. Welcome back, Andrew. How are you?
I'm excellent, and I want to say I don't want to tell you how to run your show, so this is ultimately your decision. I'm in favor of keeping this in, but you just welcomed everyone to the Thinking Poker Podcast.
I think that we should keep it in because I am having an identity crisis. Which one of us is Andrew and which one of us is Clayton? Okay, so I'm glad you pointed out my mistake there. Obviously, this is the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. Hopefully I don't get fired over that mistake, but I think people will understand that I have the host of the Thinking Poker podcast here with me, and I wanted to talk to you about the podcast. So right before we hit record, we were talking about the Thinking Poker podcast, and I had it in my brain. So if that's the biggest mistake I make this week, it'll be a good week. So
I've told my lawyers to let this one slide.
Okay, cool. Not going to sue me for stealing your copyright or something. All right. So this is the TPE podcast, but I want to talk about the Thinking Poker podcast, which is your podcast, which is wildly popular, and it's at thinkingpoker.net. And you have just put out episode 285. How many podcasts do you think actually make it to 285 episodes?
Not a lot, and especially not ones that are an hour long. I think there are some people who are doing shows where they just they do 10-minute shows and put one out every day or something. So they're kind of getting 6 to 10 shows out of what would be one show's worth of content.
Right.
I think really the biggest thing is how many make it to 10.
Yeah. Well, I read somewhere that the average podcast makes it to 2.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. I think friends get together, they're like, oh, this is fun hanging out talking. We should do a podcast. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. And then after a couple of weeks, they realize it's not that fun for them. And it's hard to get together. People are busy. Whatever the reason, most of them last 1 or 2 episodes. And so how did you and your co-host, Nate Mavis, avoid that very common pitfall?
Well, this is actually, some people probably know this, but there was a Thinking Poker podcast that never actually aired. I recorded 2 episodes, so actually there's your magic number too. I recorded 2 interviews, one of which was with Nate Mavis. So this was a solo project. That and it may have even been Nate who encouraged me to do this by myself first. But I recorded one interview with Nate. I recorded one with Gareth Chandler, who does not play a lot of poker these days, but at one time was one of our more regular guests on the Thinking Poker podcast. So I recorded these 2 interviews, and I wanted to get a couple in the bag before I aired. I guess I wanted to spare myself the embarrassment of just doing 2 episodes and then deciding it wasn't going to work and never doing it. Just letting it disappear. So instead, I just decided I was going to record a few before I started, releasing any of them. And after doing the 2, I wasn't real happy with how either of them went, and I just kind of lost the momentum on it and never did any more for a while. And then eventually, Nate was like, well, look, if you're not going to do this thing by yourself, maybe we can do it together. And I think that the co-host really was the key to the longevity, with each of us feeling some kind of obligation. I don't want to speak too much for him, but certainly on my sake, feeling an obligation towards him was greater than feeling an obligation towards myself or to some abstract idea of an audience, which didn't really exist in the beginning. You have to build that audience. So it was a lot easier to keep the commitment when I felt like it was going to be, letting him down in some way. If when there were times when I was like, maybe this isn't worth doing, that was a big help in keeping it going.
Yeah. How did you build your audience? Because for me, the key is give the wrong name of the show during the intro.
That's strong advice.
How did you guys go about building your audience? Because, of course, episode 1 had probably very few listeners that weren't your immediate circle of close friends.
The one thing that I did have going for me, I had the Thinking Poker blog at now the Thinking Poker blog is mostly just a distribution vector for the Thinking Poker podcast. But at the time it was like an actual blog, and I had a fair number of readers for that. I'm not even sure I could ballpark a number, but enough that like there were some people who were going to listen to the first podcast that I did. And I was already on Twitter and had some followers there and things. So I definitely had some people who were kind of invested in like the Thinking Poker brand, or like the Andrew Brokos brand.
The brand.
There were people who were going to trust. Like if I put out a podcast, they would listen. They would give it a listen. It would have to be good. Like they're not going to just listen to 1,000 bad podcasts. But like if I'm putting out a decent product, like there's people who are going to give it a chance. Those people already existed, and I had some access to them.
I see, because
so
that
was pretty
helpful. You. Yeah, I thought that the podcast predated the blog. So silly me. There you go.
No, that blog actually, it was syndicated on Card Player for a while, which was kind of funny because I don't think I really hit the Card Player aesthetic. And like, it was me next to, there were some other like no-name people who were on there besides me, but I think like Doyle Brunson had a blog on there. Not that these people ever updated their blogs, but like technically they had blogs on there. I think Daniel Negreanu was like some of the most famous poker players in the world. And then like me.
That's pretty cool.
And in some ways it was. It was definitely good, like exposure wise. The thing was the tone of my blog was very different from like Doyle Brunson's or whatever. And mine was much more kind of strategy oriented, and a lot of it focused on non-intuitive strategies. Like I wasn't posting kind of like bread and butter, like, oh, here's a spot where I 4-bet with pocket aces. How interesting. I was posting spots where I did weird stuff, and then I was making arguments for why, like, even though it seemed bad, it was probably good. And on thinkingpoker.net, that was well received, and like my audience kind of got that and trusted me, and it was a thinking poker audience. The audience on Card Player was like, who the hell is this guy telling me that I should be like,
more skeptical,
for like 4x pot? They're just like, who is this like preachy asshole?
Right.
So it's just like night and day, the comments that I got on Card Player versus the comments that I got on thinkingpoker.net. And for a while I didn't realize that there were comments on Card Player, and then like once I found them, I was like, oh, I wish I'd never found these. They were pretty rough.
One of the first good chunks of exposure I ever got was one of my videos comedy videos, that is, ended up appearing on collegehumor.com. And my friend at the time, I'll never forget the advice that she gave me because I took it. She said, Jamie Lee is her name. She's actually one of the co-stars on Crashing on HBO now. Of course, then she was an up-and-coming comedian that I used to write with a lot. And Jamie Lee said, all right, that's really cool that you got on collegehumor.com, Clayton, but whatever you do not read the comments. So what I did instead was I read the comments on her video on collegehumor.com because she was someone that I thought was so hilarious, and, just there's no way they wouldn't love her. And when I read her comments, I was like, well, if they feel this way about Jamie Lee, I'm never going to read my comments. To this day, I
understand that misogyny was a thing? Or?
Well, I didn't realize that how closely related misogyny and the College Humor brand were at the time. So, yeah, reading that, I just said, maybe I don't. At the time, I didn't think that my skin was thick enough. Now, this was years ago, and I've been lambasted on every possible platform now, so I can handle...
You've never been lambasted on the Thinking Poker podcast.
Well, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time Yeah. So at this point, I think I could handle reading those comments, but it's unlikely that video is still up because I'm talking, 12 years ago now. So, but yeah, definitely can be soul crushing when you think you've done good work and then you read comments, because people are very, very brave when they write comments. Especially when they don't have to give their true identities or home addresses.
The other thing for me, I think you know this. I have a pretty serious background in competitive debate. In high school and in college, that was a lot of what I did. And so to drop an argument in a competitive debate is essentially to treat it as true. So like if your opponent says something, even if it's sort of like patently wrong, it's not the judge's place. It's not to step in and be like, that's a wrong argument. Like you have to explain why it's wrong, or else the judge is supposed to treat it as true, not like interject her own opinion of whether or not it's a good argument. So there's this very strong, like I have this strong, and I've had to kind of beat this out of myself of like not dropping arguments ever. It's like things have to be responded to. But in a competitive debate round, there's time limits that sort of prevent your opponents from just like making a bunch of stupid arguments for the sake of wasting your time. And that's exactly the opposite of what the internet is.
Absolutely. And so how did you get that desire to argue with everybody until the end of time out of your system?
I mean, I think you just have to recognize the futility of it, and like I still have this problem on Twitter from time to time, and I'm still developing strategies for dealing with it. But as much as possible, I try to have a very clear objective if I'm getting involved in an argument online. Definitely if it's an argument with someone that I don't know well. Even with people that I know well, I think you're usually better off having those disagreements in person, or at least by email, where you can sort of like write your thoughts out more thoroughly. So if I do get involved, so like one thing that I'll do is sometimes like Daniel Negreanu will post some stuff that I disagree with. And my objective when I respond to those is not really to change Daniel's mind. I mean, it would be great if I did, but like he doesn't. I'm actually surprised how often he does engage with it, to be honest, to his credit. Like obviously he's has I think he's like 2 million followers or something crazy. So that he's responding at all actually is to his credit. But my objective is not to change Daniel's mind. And I think in general, if you're arguing with someone on the internet, your objective should not be to change that person's mind. It's just not. That's not what changes people's minds. It's not the environment in which people's minds change. If I'm responding to something that Daniel Negreanu said, it's because he has 2 million followers, and because I want at least some of those followers to see the other side of that issue. So what I'm really trying to do is just make them aware of what is the argument on the other side, and that there is an argument on the other side. Because I think and there's other people who do this too. He's just sort of the most high profile one. I think he has a tendency to post a lot of stuff that's sort of makes sense unless you think about it, or like makes sense if you haven't heard the argument on the other side. And I think a lot of people, it just these kind of, common sense is the term that people tend to use for like, I have a sort of negative view of what a lot of people call common sense. I think it tends to be more like common bigotry or something.
Yeah, sense isn't actually all that common.
Yeah, and I just like what people want to call common sense is really stuff that they want to be true, but they can't really justify. And so, like, common sense is kind of a way of saying, like, I don't have to justify this. Anyone who says it's wrong is just, like, sophistry.
Give me an example of that. I'm not sure.
Okay, this is one that I think is it's probably not going to resonate with everybody, but, public education is an issue that I have been more into it sometimes in my life than I am now. But it's an issue that's important to me. And you probably know this, but like school choice is a big topic in the United States right now. And a big part of like education reform is, should we have charter schools? Should we have vouchers? Should we give people more control? And this is related to ideas about privatizing education. So a lot of these schools are like not strictly public schools. And I think there's a lot of people who are they're not traditional public schools anyway. I think there's a lot of people for whom like the term common sense is like, well, if you create more choice, or you give parents the ability to choose which school their students are going to go to, then like the schools are going to be better. That's just common sense. And so it's not entirely wrong, but there's a lot of stuff that when you think like the details of how that gets implemented, like if you think about what are the actual incentives of a for-profit school, or in particular of a private charter school that's operating as kind of a test case right now, which is what many of them are, is there's specific charter schools that exist for the purpose of being laboratories of, kind of what would happen if we gave private groups, often for-profit groups, the opportunity to run schools with a lot fewer of the negative term would be red tape, or the kind of stuff that gets imposed on traditional public schools. Would they produce better test results and all this other stuff? So these schools kind of exist as laboratories, and they're meant to be able to compare to traditional public schools and see, okay, are they doing things that work? And again, that sounds like common sense. Like, that just sounds like straightforwardly a good idea. The problem is that those schools have a lot of incentive to cherry pick which students they admit into the school. And so the question then becomes, like, in a world where that's the model for public education, what happens to the students who are very difficult or expensive to teach? Like, no for-profit school wants to take them, and they drag down the test scores of these laboratory schools. And so a lot of these schools actually end up putting a lot of effort into only accepting students who are going to generate good test scores, and like not letting students who are going to generate bad test scores take the tests. And there's all these other kind of things that happen because of what their incentives actually are. And that's the kind of thing that I think tends to get dismissed. Like, when you try to make those more nuanced arguments, people are like, oh, but choice is just better. It's common sense.
Okay. Well, yeah, that is a great example of somebody just kind of brushing off the other side of the argument by saying it's common sense. Are charter schools good or bad is probably a question that we're not supposed to be answering on the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. But I see what you mean about how people will just say that's common sense. And, I don't know what it is about Daniel Negreanu that every time he tweets, he seems to be, he's putting something out there that he assumes everyone's going to agree with. And then, he has a mea culpa moment where he's, I didn't mean it like that. I rewrote it now. I tried to fix it.
Yeah, I don't even know that he assumed. I mean, sometimes I wonder if it's not a deliberate strategy. I mean, obviously you get more engagement on a tweet. Like, I don't know that he's this mercenary about it, but, posting controversial things is a better way of getting people to engage with your Twitter than just posting sort of anodyne, I have 2,000 chips going into level 12 of this tournament. Here we go. Like, that's not, people don't engage with that in the same way that if you're posting like controversial opinions and asking people to agree or disagree with them, you're going to get a lot more engagement.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's him. He's an interesting fellow. I met him at the PCA this summer. It felt like summer. It was last month. It was, after the comedy show. And, he's like, oh, I'm going to follow you on Twitter. What's your Twitter? And he had me blocked. So he looked at my Twitter, and the two of us were laughing like, what did I ever do to you? He's like, I don't know. Did you ever say more rake is better? Because everybody who says that just gets an immediate block. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I might have made a joke about that or something, but if you want to unblock me, I'll promise never to say that again. And we just, had this moment. He's engaged to Amanda Leatherman, who's someone that I've met before and I was familiar with years ago. So I think, like, for the sake of all of that and just for feeling love after a comedy show, he unblocked me. So I guess I'm the few, the proud, the unblocked.
Yeah, that's a good story.
It's kind of a new lease on life, and I owe it all to comedy. Mentioning Daniel kind of gets me to another question I had for you, because I know that your background, at least poker-wise, is in, I think you started out online and then moved to live. And if you're like me, you remember kind of the good old days of Pokerstars. What do you think kind of generally with what's been going on with Pokerstars lately?
Truthfully, I haven't followed it that closely because I don't play much on there anymore. I played WCoop and nothing else last year, and I'm probably not even going to play that this year, which is all these things are kind of interrelated. Mostly the games are just quite tough these days. Traveling, going to Canada to play has some expenses associated with it as well. The only reason I played WCoop last year is I have a friend who lives in Montreal who his roommate had just moved out, and so he had like a free room, and he invited me to just come stay for free.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. Like, I still kind of enjoy it. It's nice to just be able to like sit around in your pajamas and play online poker. But I mean, those games are real tough.
I swear I've seen people wearing pajamas at the World Series.
Oh, for sure, yeah, but it's still not as comfortable as.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah. So
I guess you were doing one of your bits there.
No, yeah, that was a skit. I think that would qualify as a skit more than a bit. I think a lot of the high stakes players decided not to play last Sunday.
Yeah, we actually, unrelated to that, we just had Giraffe Ganger on the show, who was the coordinator of that boycott or protest or whatever you want to call it. But honestly, that wasn't even related to why we had him on. He's just an interesting dude. But yeah, that's I do think that's interesting.
Isn't he like the top crusher online right now, or one of them?
He's right up there, yeah, top 10.
I know that name for sure. Oh, but you guys didn't get it because I don't want to repeat content.
Well, no, I mean we talked a little about Pokerstars. We did not talk about that boycott specifically.
Okay, yeah, it kind of reminds me of years ago when Black Friday happened, and then everybody said nobody play at Venetian because Sheldon is against. And then people were like, "Oh, all the good players are not going to go to Venetian, so maybe I should go play at Venetian." Mm-hmm. Because the guy that owns a Venetian, Sheldon Adelson, not sure how you pronounce his name, but he's very much against online poker and was one of the driving forces behind Black Friday. I guess my question is, do you think that players will ever really be able to get it together and make a difference, given that we are all a bunch of renegade lone wolves?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the lone wolf thing is the issue. I mean, I don't know a lot about the history of organized labor, but I mean, it was organized for a reason. It was, right. and it was a lot of work to maintain it, which is why it has sort of backslid. I mean, it's a big collective action problem to maintain a boycott of that scale, and it definitely is. There's a lot of incentive to. I mean, I guess it'd be kind of the equivalent of crossing the picket line. I mean, there's a lot of incentive for, as you said, if a bunch of good players are not going to play, then, for people to kind of play. And especially with online, I mean, you don't even know for sure. Someone might be claiming that they're participating in the protest and they're actually playing in that tournament on their buddy's account or on some second account or something. I mean, the anonymity of it makes it difficult also. So the short answer is no. I could imagine some kind of players union being created, but I still don't think it would do that. The kind of thing I could imagine it doing is if there were more problems similar to what was happening pre-Black Friday with Ultimate Bet and Full Tilt Poker and some of these sites, Lock Poker is another good example. Some of these sites have operated in really downright shady ways. And I have no idea. They nominally have regulators located in Gibraltar or wherever. I really have no idea what those people are doing or what their incentives are. I doubt that their incentives are really to regulate all that strictly. These companies that they're regulating are also their biggest customers, far more so than you or I or someone who might be playing on those sites are. So, I mean, I can imagine something where there's sort of a players union that says, here are the things that we expect from an online poker site. We want to see this kind of transparency. We want to know that your random number generator is this and this and this. We want to know that you have these security protocols in place. I don't even know what those would need to be, but presumably you could have a council of players who put those together and say, if you want the poker players union stamp of approval, you have to meet these things. And maybe you could get to the point where having that stamp of approval really was worth a lot of money, and a lot of people wouldn't feel comfortable playing on a site that didn't have that stamp of approval. That's the closest I can think of to how. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to sort of maintain a long-term boycott. The community of people who are playing specifically that 5K tournament on Stars is pretty small, and they do mostly know each other, and it is a very reputation-based community, and a lot of them are probably backed by the same people. So there might be a little bit more of it, in a community that small and tight knit, it might be a little more feasible to hold something like that together. But no, a mass boycott of the Venetian is never going to work.
Right. Or the Sunday Million.
Right.
Yeah. But I do think it's honorable that they want to do something, but I think it's unfortunate that Pokerstars seems to, maybe they have a long-term strategy that I'm not seeing, but it doesn't seem to be emphasizing public relations.
Well, and specifically, it's not emphasizing professional relations. I mean, I actually think that the more rake is better thing that you mentioned earlier with Negreanu has become such a meme, and it's an easy thing to make fun of. It's a terrible soundbite, but
Sure.
in terms of like the argument that he's actually making, I don't think it's that unreasonable. I think professional poker players a little bit have our heads up our own asses a little
Yeah.
in terms of like, there's not a lot of reason Pokerstars needs to cater to professionals. I mean, to some degree, professionals are going to go where the games are soft, even if it means like higher rake and less good game conditions. Like there's going to be an equilibrium. I mean, not everyone is going to be able to hack it there, and like the most marginal professionals are going to drop out and not participate anymore. Note I said I'm not playing WCube next year.
Right.
But I mean, a fair number, like if enough fish are there, even if the rake is high, it's going to be worth it for the better professionals to play there. And I mean, there are people who study this kind of thing more than I have, but I think there's a lot of legitimate reasons why they felt like having the kind of mass multi-tabling professional players that were really overrunning that site for a while was not good for. I mean, there's some question as to how oriented they are short-term versus long-term, and that is a topic that we get into with DraftGanger. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily like a bad business decision for them to be discouraging professionals and making the game more appealing to like gambly players. I think some of these people have this idea that poker is supposed to be beatable, or that it's supposed to be like you're somehow like entitled to make a living from it or something, and that's definitely not true. Like Pokerstars does not give a shit whether you make a living. That's not their job to give a shit. And you kind of like they're pursuing their own interest, and like to some degree they need some professionals for like liquidity reasons. But if they can get a big enough player pool and they have a lot of people who are willing to just like gamble with each other, I don't know that they care that much about having professional players there. And if they have a lot of players who aren't rake sensitive or are willing to pay higher rake in order to have a certain kind of game experience, that doesn't seem intrinsically wrong to me. I'm not saying that is or isn't the case. Like they might just be making a bunch of bad or at least short-sighted business decisions. I just don't think it's like on the face of it ridiculous.
Huh. Well, we'll have to check out that interview you did with DraftGanger to get his perspective on that part of it as well. I just want to apologize to any listeners who might be hearing a cat. My cat Bert is definitely trying to make his podcast debut tonight. He's in the next room, but he's definitely trying to get my attention. But
for what it's worth, I'm not hearing Bert.
Oh, okay. I don't know if this microphone is picking Bert up or not, but it's like all I can hear. I'm trying to concentrate on what you're saying, and there's this noisy meow in my ear. It's in the next room, but don't worry, Bert. I'll get to you later. All right. So you made some good points about rake, and yeah, as you mentioned, the soundbite with Daniel, and of course Doug Polk had a great time, a field day, if you will, with that particular quote. Even built a billboard. More rake is better.
Yeah, which is hilarious. I mean, yeah. Even though I think it's kind of an unfair argument, like I do think that's a very funny thing to do.
You know, I enjoy Doug Polk. I don't care what other people think of him. I enjoy him immensely. Anyway, when you set out to, say for example, like we've been talking a lot on this podcast about the World Series of Poker schedule that's been sort of released piecemeal over the last few weeks. Like, oh, is it going to be the 10Ks are going to be on these days, and these are some of the new things we're doing. They've been trying to build, I think, excitement by kind of giving it to us like almost like WikiLeaks or something. Like, oh, did you hear about this? That's going to happen,
Yeah, if they're like guaranteed headlines every time they release something, then they might as well get 8 headlines out of it instead of 1.
Yeah, it's a good maneuver on their part, I think. But when you set out to plan your schedule for the summer, especially given how things have changed over the years, it used to be really the only game in town was the World Series of Poker. Then Venetian kind of got on board with their Deep Stack Extravaganza, which I always thought was a hilarious name. I think they dropped the Extravaganza part for the most part nowadays.
They still call it the DSE, don't they?
They do, but then the signs just say Deep Stack Series or something. Yeah. They don't want to remind us what the E stands for because it's just the wrong word. I don't know what the right word is, but extravaganza is not it. That's like a used car like event, like on President's Day weekend. Or how do you decide which tournaments you play, and what weight do you put on how much the rake is as a percentage of the outlay?
I think they're all relatively close on the rake. So, I mean, it certainly would influence my decision if there were places where we're vastly different. You know, if there were some places where you're playing 900 plus 100 and other places where it's 800 plus 200. But I don't think there's that kind of disparity, at least not the stuff that I'm really looking at.
So you don't play at Planet Hollywood, I guess?
I've never played at Planet Hollywood.
Okay, yeah, their rake is much higher than the other places.
The main reason I haven't played there, honestly, is Carlos tells these horror stories about how loud the music is there, and like I've never really talked to anyone who felt like they had a positive experience at Planet Hollywood. Everything I heard, I mentioned wanting to play it this most recent summer. I mentioned in advance of the summer that I wanted to, branch out a little bit and go to some more, like I mostly played at Rio the summer before, and I had really good experiences at Wynn and Venetian, and I'd never even went to Planet Hollywood, even though it was on the list of like places I was interested in going, because I got several people commenting like, in general, that's a good plan, but just scratch Planet Hollywood off your list.
Yeah, they're not keeping up. The Rio, like you walk in, it smells like cigarettes. You got to walk down this long hallway past all these, people in fanny packs. It's not the scene. I don't know. It's just not the scene. Nothing against fanny packs.
The Wynn is such a nice player experience.
Yeah, it's just great. The chairs are comfortable. Like there's all that kind of stuff. So yeah, how much weight do you put even on that? Like, I don't want to play someplace that's smelly or I have an uncomfortable seat. Like, is that
I don't
important?
directly put a lot of weight on that, but I do think it influences where the recreational players that I want to play with are going to be also. Like ultimately you want to be in an environment like for me, I want to be playing where a lot of recreational players are. And so I'm going to follow the things ultimately that are kind of like important to them. The WSOP is one of those things. Like that's a really powerful brand. And I think for a lot of poker enthusiasts, like playing in WSOP tournaments is kind of its own magical thing. I don't personally feel that way. I mean, winning a bracelet would be nice, but I know like there's some professional poker players for whom that's really like a life goal. It's like I gotta get one of those bracelets. I don't feel that way. I mean, it would be neat, but I don't put much stock in, like, that's not like a key life goal of mine to win a bracelet. But I think the WSOP gets some just because they have such a powerful brand, and they can draw way bigger fields in other places. And for a lot of recreational players, that's a big deal. It's just like, how big is first prize or how big is the field going to be? So, I mean, they have that natural advantage going for them, which is, I think, part of why they're not trying to compete on that other stuff. And they just can't. I mean, they're not going to be able to put on a tournament with 2,000 players and provide the kind of experience that the Wynn does, or certainly not like 6,000 players and provide the kind of experience that the Wynn does.
Sure, yeah, obviously smaller, it's friendlier, just, it's very natural for that to be the case. Yeah, but you're right, though, like, Billy Bob Jackson from Waco, Texas, doesn't want to go home and tell people I won a Goliath series at Planet Hollywood. He wants to be able to say, I played in the World Series of Poker and check out my shiny new gold bracelet.
It depends. I mean, but I do think there's a lot of recreational players for whom like being in a comfortable chair or like being able to stare at women in bikinis going into the pool club at Wynn, or just like there's stuff like that like also attracts different kinds of recreational players. So I guess I only meant to say like WSOP has one advantage in that regard, but I think in a lot of other ways, like better food, more comfortable chairs, that kind of stuff, there are recreational players to whom that appeals. But ultimately, I'm mostly just following the money, and I'm trying to anticipate where do I think I'm going to have the highest hourly rate playing, and anything else is a relatively marginal effect.
Okay, so have you found that compared with Venetian and Wynn, that the fish per capita is higher or lower or about the same?
It really varies day to day. I mean, I split my time. I don't know about evenly, but I mean, I spent a lot of time playing at all three of those venues last summer. I didn't conclude like this one is definitively better. It really depends what else is going on those times. I think there's certain WSOP events that are kind of can't miss, at least not if you're there. Most of those are like the most heavily branded, gimmicky kind of ones. The main event, obviously, but also the Millionaire Maker. Like some of those just draw, like those weekend gimmicky ones. Those draw like really high value fields. When it comes to during the week, it's just kind of a matter of like looking at what all is going on and where, and trying to anticipate what are other people going to choose? And, there's an equilibrium. Part of the reason there's no clear right answer is that, like, anyone that every professional goes to is not going to be the best one. So, like, the equilibrium does involve the professionals spreading themselves out across all those different venues. And we're all kind of trying to make our own guesses about what's going to be best that day.
Right. So, have you had a chance to peruse the schedule? We've been talking schedule a little bit here on the podcast, as especially Derek and Mark and I a couple of weeks ago. We've been discussing kind of the ones that are already circled on our calendar, even though it's only February. We're looking ahead to June. Are you doing the same?
So today was literally the first time that I'd actually looked at the schedule in anticipation of this conversation. I was kind of vaguely aware of what had come out. I rarely plan that far in advance. If I'm there, then I'll figure out what event. Like, there's not really any event other than the main event that's like, I have to be there for that event. It's more like if I decide that it makes sense for me to be in Las Vegas during that time, then I'll worry about, like, what's the best event on a given day, or like what days off do I want to take or something. But I don't think there's too many events that are going to really compel me to have my ass in Las Vegas the way the main event does. Right.
Do you think that you will end up playing a full schedule?
I really don't know.
Okay. Yeah, it's a little early to decide, maybe.
I will say I was not that excited looking at specifically the WSOP schedule, but I think that gets to the point about I just feel like the Venetian and the Wynn are putting on such strong showings now that just like browsing the WSOP schedule, I'm like, is this really going to be better than like an 1100 at the Venetian, or is this going to be better than an 800 at the Wynn? And there's a lot of what's on here. I mean, I like that the WSOP has all these 10K non-Hold'em events. They're just not what I play. I mean, I think it's great that exists. I think it should exist. I think it's what the WSOP should be, but that's not the kind of stuff that I'm looking for. If you are a high stakes PLO player, then it's, you don't have as many choices, but I do have choices for the kind of stuff that I'm looking for, which is the, low 4-figure buy-in, no limit events is the main thing that I'm eyeballing.
What I'm excited to see about this schedule is how many events are 6-handed, 8-handed, and shootouts. Because I'm a guy that likes to have a little space for his knees.
I am glad that they've mostly gotten rid of the 10-handed stuff. Like 2 and 3 years ago, they were doing a lot of 10-handed things with kind of like shallow starting stacks, and they were just brutal. Like no fun to play.
Yeah, no, it's the nut low. To me, 10-handed is the nut low and should be outlawed. So
it's crazy. Like they used to play 11-handed. I mean, Doyle Brunson talks about playing 11-handed in Super System. Can you imagine?
Yeah, that's unbelievable. I mean, I guess theoretically, Super System was written so long ago, the average size of a human was smaller. I mean, theoretically, you could play Hold'em, 16-handed, right? I mean, you could, as long as there's enough cards to deal, you could have a huge table. How boring would that be? What would your range be under the gun at an 18-handed Hold'em table?
I've thought about that. I think you limp.
You just limp?
Yeah. And I mean, you still have to have mostly strong hands, but yeah, I don't think you're open raising.
Yeah.
There's so few hands that you could warrant open raising with.
Absolutely. It's just limp. That's good. For our strategy segment today, everybody, we're going to talk about 18-handed. How to play your ranges 18-handed from all positions.
I actually do find it useful to think about that kind of stuff. I think I'm a more theoretical person than many people are, and I try to like modulate for that in my videos. But like personally, I find it valuable to like think through I find it helps me to think about actual situations that I'm going to encounter and to try to answer like hypotheticals like that. Like, how would you play at an 18-person table? What would be the right way to play if like everyone knew that you had aces before the flop? They're like the questions. Like, I mean, that one actually can come up, but I find stuff like that interesting to think about, even though it's not situations that I'm really ever going to encounter. I'm not saying we should have that conversation now, just as a matter of personal style.
I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to make sure that your podcast is more highly rated than mine. Well, in case anyone's still listening, why don't we do some strategy? Do you have a hand for me?
I do, and it's well, it's one that you've seen before because you actually had a piece of me in this tournament. And what night was it? It was before.
Oh, this is going to be a hand from the Borgata. Awesome.
Yes.
So there was a $3,500 Borgata Winter Open, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm.
And so
World Poker Tour branded.
Right, a WPT Borgata Winter Open, and we were at the party on whatever that Saturday was.
Yeah, so that was before I played the day one. And the reason I wanted to emphasize this is, you said something to me at that time, which even though I kind of know is true, I still find really helpful to hear when people have pieces of me in a tournament, which is, I'm not going to question the things that you do, or only because you're also a colleague, so like I'm looking forward to having a strategy discussion with you where you're welcome to question what I do, but that you're not going to question what I do in the sense of like, you did that with my money, like,
you
sort of
idiot. You lost my money, right? Yeah,
which I think is so important, because you really, like, even from your perspective as an investor, it's not really in your interest to have me like second guessing while I'm playing or wondering how am I going to explain this to the guys, like obviously you wouldn't be investing unless you trust a person's judgment. I think that should generally be the case. So, I mean, I think that's just, at least for me as a player, not having that pressure, because, you have to do stuff that you're not sure is correct. Like, there's no way around that. Like, you get into situations where you're like, I'm not sure what the right play is. I don't want to just call it instinct, because it's more than that, but, I believe it's going to be this thing that is kind of unconventional, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to look like an idiot, and it's entirely possible that when I have an opportunity to look into it more deeply, I'm going to realize that it wasn't a good idea, but still it's the best I can come up with right now, and you have to be willing to pull the trigger in those kinds of situations. And so, what you said to me then was really helpful, even though it wasn't a surprise to me. Like, you'd said similar things to me before, but I still find it helpful to hear those things, and I wanted to, I guess, both share that publicly and thank you for it.
Well, you're welcome, and I think it's good advice to give other people who might be backers.
Right.
I don't buy pieces of a lot of players, but if you're willing to sell, I'm always willing to buy until you make the rake too high.
More rake is better.
No, I mean, as we call it in the staking world, markup. It's similar to rake, but it's a little bit different. But yeah, that was just a joke. I think if you're going to invest money in somebody, you don't want that person to be looking over his or her shoulder like, what is my backer going to think of this one? Look, even if you screwed up a hand in a really, really bad way, like we all make plays sometimes where we go home that night and say, what was I thinking? Why did I play my hand that way? I made a big mistake today. Even that would be okay with me, because the investment is not that you're not going to make any mistakes. The investment is that you are less likely to make big mistakes than somebody that I wouldn't invest in. So, yeah, and as the backer, of course, I want my horse to feel comfortable playing, his best game. I want Andrew to take the chances that Andrew would normally take without letting the fact that he's being backed or, that I have a share of him, change the way he would play, because then I'm not getting the Andrew that I'm paying for.
Yeah,
right?
That's very good. That's a very good way of putting it.
Yeah. So if you do buy pieces of someone, like a lot of us maybe swap a few percentage points, or maybe you give a few bucks to somebody for 5, 10, 20%, whatever, kind of trying to take the pressure off of you.
And that's exactly what it did. Good,
because I don't want you to try to play perfect poker, because in my experience, trying to play perfectly just leads to big mistakes. It's ironic, but it's true. All right, so let's hear one of the hands from that event.
Yeah, so with that said, I want to know what my backer thinks about this.
Yeah, sure.
I want to know what my fellow professional poker player who's accomplished in poker tournaments thinks about this. Because I think if this were a cash game hand, it would probably not be too controversial the way that I played it. So there's this kind of like broader tournament question of what should. So I mean, here's the situation. This is level 1. This is like one of the very first hands of level 1. I'm showing up on time for this tournament, so we're quite deep. We started at 100, and we start with I believe it was 40,000 chips. Pretty sure that's right. There's an outside chance it was 50,000. I believe it was 40,000. Anyway,
I think those are 40. Yeah,
we're extremely deep.
Yeah,
right? We're 400 big blinds deep.
Yeah.
Now the pot is a little larger than if it were 50-100, so it's not quite the same. I mean, 40k at 100 is not exactly the same as 40k at 50-100, but we're extremely deep is the bottom line.
Sure.
And at this point, there's only like 4 or 5 of us there's 4 of us there at the table initially. 2 of them are not people I recognize and, do not look like people who are crushers at poker. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily look terrible, but just like I feel like I'm a better poker player than they are. And then there's a guy who I do recognize, who's someone I've played with a decent amount. He's like a high stakes player in the Maryland area. He used to play in the big game at Maryland Live. The big game is at National Harbor now, so I don't run into him as often. But he's like a winning 10-25 player, and that game at National Harbor, like one of the reasons I don't run into him too often is that game can be pretty tough. In fact, I think it's 25-50 now. So I mean, he wins in like a tough big game. Like he's a very good poker player.
Okay.
And so right away it's kind of like that's not like there's I have 3 opponents at this table right now. 2 of them I'm much better than, and one of whom, I mean, my ego wants me to say it's a toss-up. He very well may be better than I am. Right. I'm not going to make my objective is not getting big confrontations with this guy.
Right,
and that's the opposite of what you want to do.
Right, of course, and I think that's a good approach. And I think that even before you get your cards, you kind of want to look around the table. Especially you got there early, as I know is your way. You're a morning person, so you like to get there early. Especially in a tournament like this where you expect there might be some skill advantage that you'll have against the field. So, of course, you want to play deep against those players. It looks like you have kind of a bad seat at a great table from the description. Does that sound right?
Well, and there's only 4 players here so far. I mean, this guy's not even really on my left. He's only on my lleft because we're 4-handed right now.
Okay.
There's going to be 3 seats between us eventually. Or there's 3 empty seats between us.
Okay, good. So for now, it's going to be his big blind when you're in the small blind, but later that won't be the case. Right. He's going to be basically like sitting across from you almost. Right. All right. So, all right. So yeah, I like the way you're thinking heading into the hand. You don't want to get into a large confrontation against this guy who may or may not have a skill edge over you, but certainly not the guy you want to necessarily tangle with among your 3 opponents.
And especially not when I'm out of position to
right.
him, which right now I often will be, but like once the table fills up, it's not going to be quite so common that I'm out of position to him.
Yeah, that part will get easier.
So, like, believe it or not, because this hand is about to involve me getting into a big confrontation with him. Yeah. Believe it or not, I really was trying not to. Like, I explicitly said this in my head. But, like, it folds to me in the small blind, which is the same size as the big blind right now. They're both 100. I have king 8 of spades. What am I supposed to do? Open fold?
Right. Yeah. Just fold for nothing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your options are check or raise.
Yeah,
I think you can make a case for raising.
Against most people, I would raise. I didn't want to get in big confrontations with this guy. I checked.
Yeah, I have no problem with the check there. You've got the king of spades and the 8 of spades. You're at a 4-handed table, so yeah, obviously there would be times at a 4-handed table when you want to make a raise with this hand, blind versus blind. But I like giving the philosophy of trying to keep the pot small and not let him just, build the pot and play a bigger pot when he has position. I like it. So, yeah, I think I would usually check here, too.
All right, so I felt pretty good about that part. He raises to 300. I still think calling is pretty trivial. I mean, you could make a case for 3-betting. I don't think you can really make a case for folding unless it's just like you're really going extreme on the don't get in confrontations with this guy. I think this hand is much too good to fold. I don't think it would be a terrible 3-betting candidate, but in the interest of not playing a big pot with this guy, I called.
Yeah, no, I think calling is right. I agree with you that, check and then he raises. As you know, he's going to do it with a wide range. putting in like 1,200 would probably take it down a lot. But who knows? Maybe this guy perceives you as someone that's a little too, whatever, out of line and wants to call and see flop. Figure I'm so deep, I'm in position.
That's the thing. Like, no matter how he perceives me, it's just like being in position when you're this deep is a huge advantage.
Yeah.
And, King 8 suited is a good hand that can play reasonably well out of position, but it's not really enough to overcome. If I think he's even a decent player, let alone a good one, it's just like that positional advantage is massive when you're 400 blinds deep. And I think a lot of tournament players don't fully appreciate this because they so rarely play anywhere near this deep. And like when you're 40 big blinds deep, being out of position is not great, but it's not that big of a deal. When you're 400 big blinds deep, like it's a really big problem to be out of position. So like jacking up the pot, even like honestly, just like limp calling with aces here is not that bad. Yeah,
agreed, because the most likely outcome of starting with aces is you're going to end up with one pair. Right. So, how big a pot do you want to play?
Even in a 3-bet pot, like you're not nearly deep. I mean, if I 3-bet to 1,200, if I 3-bet to 1,500, like 5 times his raise and he calls, there's 3,000 in the pot and 38,500 in our stacks. Like the stack to pot ratio is still 13.
Yeah.
Like it's just not, you can't stack off with overpairs.
Yeah.
Which is why King 8 suited is a reasonable candidate, because it makes flushes. Like that's why I say it's a reasonable, like it can make a good flush. That's what makes it a reasonable 3-betting candidate. But I think it's better as a call.
Yeah, so for all those reasons, I agree with the call. So what's on the flop?
The flop is, again, like, what am I going to do? It's Jack 9-7 with 2 spades.
Okay.
And I have the King 8 of spades. Like, what, I'm supposed to open fold? Like,
right, so here we are. Obviously a flop that we're going to need to continue on. We have the King 8 of spades on Jack 9-7 with 2 spades. So we have a flush draw, we have an overcard, we have a gut shot. We got a lot going on. You're first. I see no reason to bet.
I want to make, so I did bet. And the case that I would make for betting is I don't expect him to have that wide of a c-betting range here. So let me mention this. If you were to check, what would your plan be? Are you checking intending to call or intending to raise?
I think I would base that on my read, base it on his bet size. Just kind of base it on the moment when he makes that bet. If I feel like he's really strong, then I would just call. And if I feel
he's
like
a very good player, though, so I'm kind of reluctant to think, like, I don't think I'm going to get that read. Like, I don't think I'm going to check and his bet size is going to tell me whether or not he's really strong or like his demeanor or anything. Like, okay. I think I'm not gonna know what he has as a result of his bet.
Right. So we justifiably have little reason to feel confident in our ability to get anything off of him, given that he's a high stakes pro that we have some familiarity with. Okay. So
yeah. So I mean, I think you're like, there's a lot of players where like they will, whether or not they bet and like how much they bet will tell you something about how they feel about their hand. I don't think that's really going to be the case with this guy.
Yeah. The problem for me is, what am I repping, if I lead? You're betting 400 into 600 here. What are you trying to tell him?
There's a lot of, because I don't think he's going to have a real high c-betting frequency here, I would want to bet with a lot of, like most of my strong hands are also vulnerable hands right now. If I flopped a set, if I flopped a straight, if I flopped 2 pair, most of which are in my range. Like pocket jacks, I'm probably not playing this way. 7s, I'm playing this way. Maybe even 9s, I'm playing this way. Like limp calling for this kind of the same reason I did King 8 suited. Like I just don't think I'm doing a lot of raising pre-flop in this situation. So I think I have, I think 2 things. One, I think that my limp calling range is overall stronger than his raising range. Like I think if we just looked at the equity of his range for raising pre-flop versus my equity when I limp call pre-flop, I think I have more equity than he does.
Okay.
I think like precisely because I feel like I need, like he has a big positional advantage, so I need to be overcoming that by only playing relatively good hands in this spot. Whereas he can raise a lot of hands because he has that positional advantage.
Right.
The advantage that he is going to have is that on some boards, he's going to be more nutty than I am. Like, because he has hands like aces in his range that I probably don't have, or at least he's not going to perceive me as having, then there's going to be some boards where he has the advantage of being able to bet a polarized range. This is not really one of those boards. Like, this is a board where, if anything, it might be more squarely in my wheelhouse than his. So I think this is a board where I should be driving a lot of the action, which means he should not have a real high C betting frequency here. If he has certainly, like a 9-8 kind of hand, I don't think actually that would be a reasonable betting candidate. If he has ace king, I don't think this is a very good time for him to bet. If he has 5-4, I don't think it's a very good time for him to bet. If he has pocket aces, I don't think it's that great of a time for him to bet. Like, if you bet here with aces, no spade, and get check raised, how are you feeling?
Right. Yeah, I'm not loving it, but I'm probably calling the check raise because I'm in position and I have to see what happens on the turn. I'm not going to be ready to bet fold aces in his shoes, but yeah, I don't like getting raised.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure if I'm him and I have red aces, I'm checking behind the flop.
Yeah, and I think that would probably be a very good idea. So, all right, so we have... All right, but I guess I just want to ask again, what do you feel like you're repping when you bet 400 into 600?
So I think I will play and can have a lot of those very strong hands that I mentioned, sets, two pair, straights.
Sure.
I also would do this with some hands that are marginal, like King Jack, maybe probably not 9-8, maybe like Ace 9. Some hands that are pretty good, but that don't really want to let my opponent take a free card. And yeah, I mean that's the bottom line. Like, if I only bet here with a very polarized range, meaning like those very strong hands that aren't going to mind getting raised, and then some bluffs that are going to have trivial folds if they get raised, my opponent doesn't have a lot of incentive to raise me, because then I just like only fold my bluffs and I continue with the strong hands and fold the bluffs, and he doesn't benefit that much from raising because he can probably beat the bluffs in a variety of ways. He doesn't necessarily have to raise. So giving him some incentive to raise requires, or I guess what I should say is, he's not that likely to raise a bet, I think, which is why I want to bet some hands that are that play pretty well if they are happy to get folds when they bet, that don't mind getting called when they bet, and are going to play pretty poorly if raised, which are some of those hands I just mentioned, Ace 9, King Jack.
Interesting. Yeah, I like it. I interviewed Jason Smith, is a regular guest on this podcast. He's also a TPE coach, and I told him that I do this a lot. Donk lead. I do it with my flush draws. I do it with my combo draws, and then I also have to do it with my sets and my two pairs. So yeah, I feel like our ranges are kind of similar. Let me ask you this, Andrew. Would you? Oh, and by the way, the second part of that is Jason pretty much always checks to the razor, he said.
I actually pretty much always do too. I think this exact situation is pretty specific. I do think like a default, especially for people listening who don't feel that, like, I'm pretty confident in my ability to recognize the exceptions. I think most people who try to recognize the exceptions would be better off just not making exceptions, period.
Right.
So I don't think that's a very bad strategy. I think in general, just like always checking to the pre-flop razor is a pretty fine thing to do, especially when you're peeling the big blind and there's antes in the pot. Like, this is a pretty different situation from like middle position raises and I peel from the big blind because, he made a small raise and there's antes.
Right. So obviously this is a different situation. Ranges are much wider when it's blind versus blind, and also a four-handed table, I think ranges are wider anyway.
And the point I was emphasizing of my range is pretty strong for seeing the flop, which is not the case when I'm peeling from the big blind with antes.
Right. Got it. Okay. Right. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I got you now. All right, so would you have made this bet with a hand like 8-7, like a bottom pair gut shot kind of weak
I
draw?
think that hand probably plays better as a check call.
Okay.
where it's not benefiting as much from fold equity because it does have some nutty outs. Like if you know, like the hands that I mentioned that I wanted to bet are hands that don't really have nutty outs. So like King Jack, Ace Nine, those hands don't benefit that much from seeing more cards in the same way, or I guess they suffer more from seeing more cards than 8-7 does. Like 8-7 almost always has outs, no matter how the board develops.
Okay, and before we move on, what is your range for check raising?
This is a reasonable check raising. So like all those hands that I mentioned are probably mixes. Like it's probably not that I'm just always betting those.
Sure.
So when I'm check raising here, it's going to be a combination of like nutty made hands and nutty draws. And this definitely goes in the nutty draw category. So I do think this is a hand that could viably be played as a check raise. Again, believe it or not, my thinking was that betting is actually the more small pot option. Like if I'm choosing between check raising and check calling, or sorry, check raising and betting, I don't think check calling is that bad, but I think because this hand doesn't have a lot of showdown value, but has a lot of equity, it really benefits from aggression a lot. So I'm kind of looking at betting and check raising as my primary options, and I think betting is actually the one that's more likely to keep the pot small.
Would you mind elaborating, just for our listeners, actually, and for me too, why having a hand that has minimal showdown value but a lot of equity is a good hand for playing that way?
So the lot of equity part is why I'm okay putting a lot of money into the pot with it, which is what check raising entails. You know, like I'm building up a large pot. I mean, the check raise is going to be called a fair bit of the time, and I'm going to be putting a fair number of chips in the pot, and I'm going to want to bet some turns that don't improve my hand, and that's going to involve putting more chips into the pot, and I want to have equity when I'm doing that. I don't want to be just like check raising with pocket twos here, just kind of shoveling money in the pot with an arrow.
Right, yeah.
But at the same time, like some that have a lot of equity are going to play a lot better as either they're not going to be bluffs because they're like, you know, straight or something, or they're going to play better as calls. So if I had like 9-8, that's another one. Like Pio Solver probably plays a mix of like check calls and check raises with 9-8, but honestly, it probably plays a mix with King 8 of spades also. But I think 9-8 is more appealing as a calling hand because of its showdown value. So like when I check call with 9-8, I don't have to get there to win. I might just have the best hand already. Whereas with King 8 of spades, it's a lot less likely that I win unimproved. And so it also benefits from fold equity more than a hand like 9-8 does.
Right, I see. Because 9-8's already, you know, quote unquote made, as we say. All right, so as is normally the case when I speak with you, Andrew, I go from I don't see any reason to bet to now feeling like, yeah, betting's a perfectly viable option here, and I kind of like it.
That makes me feel good.
Yeah, it should. All right, so you make it 400, and what happens?
He raises to 1,400.
Oh, of course he does. Okay, great. But obviously we have so much equity in the pot. We want to continue. I guess the question is simply, do we call or do we raise it back? And I think in this spot, my inclination is to raise again. I
was so sure you were about to say call. I was like, oh, it's going to be another fight.
Is that great? Oh, okay, so I guess spoiler alert, sounds like Andrew's about to raise again too. You could tell us why you want to raise again, but for me, it's just I have a lot more equity here on the flop than I'm likely to have on the turn, and I think that I can take this pot down a lot, putting a lot of pressure on him when he has something like pocket queens, or even, you know, even pocket aces. Like like you said earlier, how far does he want to go this early in this tournament with just one pair when you're showing a lot of strength here? You know, unless he can always correctly put you on some kind of flush draw, he's not going to be too happy if you make it something like 4,000. So,
which, by the way, is absolutely what I would do if I had 10-8 or pocket nines. like, I would definitely be three betting those hands. Like, that's part of why I want to have a bluffing range is, if I have a very strong hand here, remember, we still have 40,000 chips behind. Like, if I have the nuts, I need to put some money in this pot. I can't just be, check calling the nuts on the flop or bet calling the nuts. I need to be building this. And also, like, 10-8 is not going to be the nuts probably by the time we get to the river. So I need to get the money in early with those hands. And, so like, I'm definitely going to fast play my strong hands. And I want to balance that with some bluffs. This is a good enough player that, like, I do think he's going to be incentivized to have some folds when I three bet here, and I want to take advantage of that when I have this hand that benefits. I mean, it's the same argument as for check raising, really. It's just like these hands that have a lot of equity but no showdown value benefit from aggression, and like the no showdown value thing becomes even more true in a raised pot than it does. Like, a check call pot, occasionally king high is actually good, or like just hitting an 8 or a king will make you the best hand. And when the action goes bet raised, that becomes less true. Like, you're less likely to win the pot by hitting a king or an 8 when he has a hand that can raise the flop. But the nutty outs, like the out to a 10 or to a spade, are so resilient that even in a 3-bet pot, you're still going to have a very strong hand if you hit. I would be a little less inclined, I would probably not 3-bet like 5-6 of spades, because that hand, if I hit it, I only have a small flush. And I know, like, probably a lot of people are listening to this and thinking, like, it's a flush blind versus blind, idiot. Like, what do you? But when you're this deep, it matters. Like, we're talking about like 3 bets going in the pot. Like, I don't really want to stack off with 5-6 of spades here, because I turn a flush. Certainly, if I hit an 8 when I have 5-6, so I make like the low end of a straight when Jack 9-8-7 is on the board. That's another hand. Like, I'm not really looking to stack off with that. So I don't think like 5-6 of spades, even though it looks like a combo draw when you look at this board, I don't think that's a good hand to 3-bet the flop with, because your outs are not nutty when the pot gets that large. But I do think king 8 of spades, making a straight is nutty, and making a king high flush is nutty.
Right. I mean, obviously, if you make a straight, king queen got there, but it's just so hard for him to have, given the way he's playing his hand. Like, I don't see him raising king queen, and we even have the best king to have already. So yeah, I don't know. I like that we block 10-8, so we don't have to worry as much about him having it. I like having the flush draw to fall back on. I like building the pot here, even though we said before you described the hand that the strategy, the preconceived notion of the way to approach this table was, I don't want to play a big pot with this player. But, that's just poker. Like, the way things are shaking out here, I think just calling is actually pretty bad, because now you really have to hit to win, and it's just, I don't want this guy to be in the driver's seat when this is the best street for me.
Right.
Draws do well on the flop. They don't do as well on the turn.
Yeah, I think that this is a thing that a lot of people kind of misunderstand. It's like they think they can play pot control when they're out of position. And like, the size of the pot is not up to you.
Right, you're out of position.
Your opponent can put as much, like, this is no limit hold'em. At any time, he can put as much money into the pot as he wants. So the idea, like, I'm going to keep the pot small by just checking and calling, like, that's not, he's allowed to overbet the turn, and this is a player who's good enough to do that. If I just call the flop, like, he's allowed to bet again on the next, and like, I can't really not see the river with this hand. I mean, there's very few turns where I'm going to be able to fold this hand. So it's really just a question of, do you want to have fold equity or not? And not every hand needs to have fold equity, but this one really benefits from it a lot. So I was like, if we're going to see the river one way or the other, I'd rather be going that far, or not necessarily see the river. Like, if I'm going to stay in until the river, I'm not folding before the river, then I would rather be the one doing the betting than the one just like calling and hoping to get there.
Yeah, and also given, as you said, that you're not always going to be raising with all of your flush draws, 3-betting with all of your flush draws, that means that your range for raising doesn't include that many flush draws. So it's kind of nice to be able to represent 10-8 here.
Yeah, even like the nut flush draw, I mean, there's a case for just check calling that on the flop. That has more showdown value than king high does. Like, when you have that, you're beating a hand like king queen, and he might be playing, which, king 8 is not beating. So, I think even like ace x of spades has a little bit of showdown value that king 8 of spades does not.
Agreed. I tend to play my nut flush draws a little bit more passively for that exact reason.
Mm-hmm.
As a general note, obviously there are exceptions.
Yeah, and I might end up playing it aggressively later. Same thing with 9-8. Like if I check call the flop and he bets again, I might turn the hand into a bluff at that point and check raise. But so like what it means to have showdown value, it changes over time. Like some hands have showdown value on the flop, but if your opponent keeps betting, then their showdown value kind of shrivels, and then turning it into a bluff becomes viable on a later straight, even though it wasn't the plan on the flop. This hand just doesn't have showdown value even on the flop, so I'm taking an aggressive line with it right away.
Excellent. I like it. So when you what did you raise to?
I made it 4,500. So I bet 400. He made it 14. I made it 45.
Okay. Yeah, I think I said 4,000. I have no issue with 45, obviously. What is the plan? Like, if he keeps raising, are we going to keep raising and just get this whole M of 200 in? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
If he makes it like 11 or 12K on the flop, I'm pretty happy to shove. That's almost a better outcome than having him call, actually, because the problem when he calls is that, and spoiler alert, the turn is often a blank, and these hands are like combo draws are tough to play on blank turns. If you can get them, like, there's no way I can be in really bad shape. I mean, I guess the absolute worst case scenario would be if he had like, I don't even remember what the non-spade card was on the flop. If he had like ace-9 of spades, my equity is pretty poor. But there's very few hands that really have this hand in bad shape right now. Even against the set, I'm not that bad off. Like, you can't go that wrong putting the money in on the flop. There's a lot of room to get in trouble on the turn. Like, if I bet the turn and he shoves, you have to fold, but it's a nasty, nasty spot. Like, you fold a lot of equity when that happens. But like, you also can't really, like, I don't think check raising all in on a blank turn is that appealing. I don't think check calling a blank turn is that appealing. Just, blank turns are really hard to play if he feels this 3-bet. I would be, I think, happier to have him 4-bet and I can just shove and it's a re-entry. Like, I can rebuy again. Like, the money's not going in bad if I get it on the flop.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you, especially I forgot it was a re-entry situation. So yeah, why don't we just go with it here if he does that? I take it he did not do that.
Nope. He called and the turn was 3 of diamonds.
Oh, that's not the card we wanted to see at all. That sucks. Give me a different one. Can I get a mulligan on that?
They won't do that at the Borgata, believe it or not.
Oh, okay. Just in the Baccarat pit. All right, so yeah, that card changes nothing except that now we have half the equity we had on the flop, basically. Okay, so what to do? Having taken the lead in the hand, basically, on the flop, I think we need to keep betting here.
Yeah. I mean, we can't, I don't think we can really check fold to a bet. So again, like, a bet is going in the pot, and it's just a question of, do we want to be the aggressor or not when it happens? The only downside to being the aggressor is if he shoves, that really sucks. But I don't think there's that many hands he can shove here, especially because we are blocking 10-8. There's like, even if he has like bottom set, I don't think that's that appealing of a shove for him to jam like pocket sevens here. Right. So I don't think it happens very often that he raises. That's the only real disaster that can result from us betting.
I think I'm gonna politely disagree about bottom set. I think if we check, having put in 4,500 on the flop and now checking the turn, which is something nobody does when they have the nuts.
Oh, sorry, I meant if we bet 7K.
Oh,
I don't think it would be good for him to jam 40 with pocket sevens.
Good, then I don't have to politely disagree. You are representing stronger than bottom set, and I think bottom set is just a call.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good bluff catcher. It has good equity. It might even be ahead of a little bit of my value range, but if I call a shove, it's not going to be in good shape. I'm mostly going to have a higher set or 10-8.
Yeah. So when he called your 3-bet on the flop, how did you range him at that point?
That's a good question. I think he can definitely have some slow played strong hands. Some of them might be it could be as strong as 10-8 that he's not. I don't think that's a mandatory 4-bet on the flop for him. I think he might have a hand like pocket sevens that's very strong, but not quite strong enough that he wants to get all the money in with it. I think that's pretty viable. Jack 9 goes in that same category of like very good, but not really trying to put 40K in.
Right.
And I do, I think draws are in his range, but I block a fair number of them. Queen 10 is, I don't block any of Queen 10. I do block a lot of spade draws. I block like 8-6, Ace 8. I don't know that he would play 9-8 this way. I think he might even pull 9-8 to the 3-bet on the turn. Maybe not if he had a backdoor flush draw or something. I think he needs a relatively good hand. I'm not even sure, like you said, overpairs may or may not be playing this way. I think pocket aces, no spade would be a pretty reasonable fold to the flop 3-bet. With a spade, he should certainly be calling. Yeah, I think he's like relatively strong, and I do think I block a fair number of his draws.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
The turn did put a backdoor flush draw up, by the way. So it was the 3 diamonds, and there was a diamond on the flop. So there are now 2 flush draws on the board, and that's relevant because I do think he has some hand. Like I don't think he's calling with a bare backdoor flush draw on the flop, but I do think a backdoor flush draw would make some hands that might otherwise be pretty borderline would turn them into hands that he is calling with on the flop, like a 9-8 of diamonds or something.
Yeah, we'll call the 3-bet because he could pick up so much equity on the turn.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. All right. So yeah. We check.
Oh, and king queen also. I block a little bit of king queen, but that's definitely in his range.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he has to call with king queen. Yeah. All right. So
you gotta look how much money he's going to make if he hits a 10.
Right.
I'm ready to put stacks in if a 10 comes, and that's going to be good for him.
Right. Okay, so we need to bet again, for all those reasons, and that you're not that concerned about getting raised. So, how much is the pot now?
9,000, 9,600.
Yeah, 96. All right. So, I guess I would put in about 6K.
Yeah, I bet 7. We're in the right neighborhood.
Okay.
I'm just kind of thinking about potentially setting up a river shove, which even if I don't want to do it with this hand, I am going to want to do when I have like pocket jacks or 10-8 or something, which is what I'm trying to represent right now. So, it's if I bet 7, we're going to end up with 23 in the pot and like 29 in the stacks, 28 in the stacks. Whereas if you bet 6, now you've got like 21 in the pot and 31 in the stacks, just a slightly harder amount to,
Yeah.
It's more of an overbet to shove the river, but I think we're in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, actually, that kind of talks me into the 7. I like the 7 now. All right, so you bet 7, and assuming he didn't raise?
He did not raise.
Okay.
And then the river was the queen of diamonds, so the backdoor flush gets there. Other than, my hand does not get there. I still just have king high, which I do not think has any showdown value at this point.
No, I'd be shocked if it has any.
And as we say, there's 23K in the pot, something like that, and 28 in the stacks.
Right. So we've taken the lead on the flop, continued on the turn, bricked off on the river, and it's more than just a brick. I think it's important to point out that this is not just a brick. This is just a bad card.
Yeah, those backdoor flush draws are they're in both of our ranges, but I think they're probably a little more in his range.
I think they're more in his range too, and I also think other hands that he may have been playing strongly have queens in them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just I don't want to bet again. I hate to put in so much and then just leave it for him to take, but I also hate trying a hopeless bluff that's almost definitely going to get called.
Yeah. And the blockers here do not work in our favor.
No.
We don't want to block spades right now.
Right.
A much better shoving hand. If I had like 9-8, especially if one of them was a diamond somehow, that would be a way more appealing shoving hand where I'm blocking middle set, I'm unblocking spades, I'm blocking 10-8, I'm blocking flushes. That's the kind of hand I want to be bluffing with. And I don't think that pair of nines is giving me much showdown value at this point when the pot has gotten this large. I do think that, the blockers here are just all wrong.
Yeah, the blockers are on the wrong side of the coin, and it's just a card that gives him equity he may not have had before that might just make him want to call. Like you mentioned king queen. I don't know if this guy's good enough to call a shove with king queen. He's probably not.
I mean, he's not afraid to. Like, I mean, the
Right.
money. It's not going to be like, oh, I don't want to bust on level 1 of the tournament. Like, he's
Right.
not in that mindset. So, I mean, he's going to think about it, and if he decides it's a profitable call, he's going to make it.
He's just going to make it because he's a robot, wizard, genius, world beater, and that for all those reasons, I think betting again is bad. And as much as I hate give up spots, I think we have one here. Did you give up?
I did.
Okay. You checked and lost to...
He was very happy to check behind, and he had Jack 9, which I do not think was a hand that was going to fold to a river shove.
Yeah.
And I think he played impeccably.
Yeah, he played
like, I think we both played it fine. Like, I don't really have regrets about how I played it. I think it's the cooler, basically.
Yeah, well, it is. What is your plan if you hit a king on the river?
It's a good question. I mean, it's not good enough to value bet. Like, he has too many hands that look like this and not that many hands that can hero to a river bet. I mean, I think it has to start with a jack. I'm not even sure it's a good call. Like, what is he? I guess all of the queen 10 gets there. Yeah, I think it's a check fold.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not even expecting to win that much. I mean, occasionally it goes check check, and he has like ace jack or pocket queens. But I mean, that's a lot to hope for. Like, I expect to lose the pot like 90% of the time if I river a king. It's not at this point. That is not going to produce showdown value. If I had check called the flop and check called the turn and the river's a king, then maybe I'm good like 30% of the time. But with how large this pot has gotten, yeah, a pair of kings is not winning it.
Yeah.
But I also don't think it's that great of a blocker. Like, you're not blocking queen 10, which is pretty important.
Yeah, that's very important. All right. Well, that's an unfortunate start to your tournament. To say the least. What did we lose? Half our stack. Oh man.
The crazy part is within the orbit, I was up to 60K. So I'm at 20K, 28K. So within the orbit, I'm up to 60K and down to 40K. Not even within the half hour.
Right. That's just the nature of shorthanded tournament no limit hold'em with aggressive opponents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a little like, it's not really what you're trying to do in level 1 of a tournament, but it was just how things, I had hands that I felt like needed to, large pots needed to be played with them. And to some degree it was cooler. I mean, the big pot that I won was I flopped a set, someone turned a straight, and then I rivered a full house. So It was, there was also a cooler element there. To some degree it was, and this hand also is like one person has a combo draw, someone else has top 2. A lot of money is going to go in the pot in those kind of situations, and it doesn't mean that anyone made a mistake.
No, actually, I think I like your plays on all streets in this one. So your backer approves for what it's worth. But yeah, I want to hear the rest of the story, but I'm kind of out of time. Can you tell us how the rest of this tournament went for you? Because I'm sure people are curious.
They may be curious. They'll probably be grateful that we're out of time, because the rest of this talk would mostly just be me whining.
Oh, no. A lot of bad beat stories in there.
There were just a lot of this kind of situations where I needed to put a lot of money in the pot, and either I had second best hands from the get-go, or, people had kind of like, there was one where I like 4-bet with queens, and then, or no, I 4-bet with ace queen, and someone called like a pretty large 4-bet with pocket 2s. Like, didn't, they called off like 25% of their stack or something with pocket 2s, and then the flop is like queen x deuce. So it's kind of like, I didn't feel good about it when he shoved the flop, but I was also like, well, I mean, he really shouldn't have twos in his range. Right. But you did. I mean, it's sort of like the reward is there. I mean, it's equivalent to people like playing jackpots. A casino doesn't get angry at someone when they hit a jackpot, right? The casino owner doesn't come out and yell at you, like, you idiot, what are you doing putting quarters in this jackpot, in this slot machine? Don't you know that it's a losing proposition for you, right? Like, and the casinos make money even though they pay off jackpots. So I think sometimes people get this mindset of like, they hate paying off when people get lucky. They're like, well, what if my opponent flopped 2 pair against me? He's probably going to win a big pot. If he made a bad call pre-flop for a lot of money and flopped 2 pair, like, he's probably going to win a big pot, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong, or like you're more likely to make a mistake, I think, trying to find the fold, like the hero fold in those kind of situations. than just accepting like, yeah, if they like bad play does get rewarded. You know, it's not people have the sense of justice of like, oh, the bad play got rewarded. Like, yeah, you're supposed to reward bad play. That's why they give Jack, like, you want people making bad plays. Like, it's just because they get rewarded doesn't like retroactively make their call good. And there's consequences to you of trying not to pay off those hands, which is you end up folding the best hand or folding a hand that has a lot of equity or something. But anyway, I'm getting off on a rant. Bottom line is I got pretty unlucky in a lot of spots and never really got above 40K again, made day 2 and lost aces to kings.
Oh, wow. So you even managed to survive all that bad variance, being on the wrong side of variance, and then still made
That's
it to
the brutal
day
thing
2
about
somehow.
these deep stack tournaments. Like, you can run bad for a really long time.
And then you still make day 2 and don't cash.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sometimes it's brutal. Sometimes it's torture. But we do love it. And we love you, Andrew. We appreciate you coming on again. And I'd love to hear some more about this tournament and any other tournaments you're playing, if you'd be willing to come back on my Thinking Poker podcast that I'm the host of here, apparently.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, Clayton.
It's my pleasure. Andrew, what else are you doing for TPE these days? You have any videos coming out?
I just finished recording one. It was yesterday. But I did, actually, when you were talking about the W Coop, part of the value to me of playing the W Coop is I get some TPE fodder, because it is hard. I mean, I do some live hand history reviews, but it's a lot of work to put those together, and it still kind of comes off in a format that's slightly difficult for people to read. So like, it's hard to do a hand history review from a live tournament. So the online gives me an opportunity to do that. I actually played, not as part of the W Coop, but partly because I thought it would be interesting to TPE people. I played a $5 rebuy, one Pokerstars, which is smaller than what I usually play, but I think people have the perception when they watch a video and see me do something that's not what they would do, it's easy for people to dismiss it and say like, oh, he's playing a $3,500 tournament. That would never work in the tournament that I'm playing. So I think it's good for people to see how am I playing when I'm playing the kind of stakes that I think a lot of TPE members are playing. And I think what people are going to find is it's not as different from how I'm playing in a 3,500 as they might think. Like, essentially, I don't want people to have the excuse of saying, oh, that's different stakes than I play, so what I'm doing is probably fine. Like, I want people to be challenged, and I think seeing me do some things in a $5 rebuy that they're not doing, and I mean, I also probably make some mistakes in it, and I try to acknowledge those as well, of like, oh, maybe this wasn't the best thing to try to do against a $5 rebuy player. But I think like having some stuff that's at the stakes, like I know a lot of my content is higher stakes, and having some stuff that's at the stakes of what probably the majority of TP members are playing is valuable. So hopefully people are going to get some value out of seeing the replay from a $5 rebuy. Yeah,
for sure. And comedy, we say, know your audience. So it seems like you're doing that too as a video maker.
Yeah, and I didn't go like super deep in it, but I think I played like 400 some hands. I mean, I was somewhat deep in it. It's not like a final table type thing, but I thought it would be good for people just to see. Yeah, it's not like a super remarkable tournament, but I don't do a lot of smaller stakes content, and I thought it would be good to have out there.
Yeah, well, good. I'm definitely going to watch it. I'm sure most of the listeners will. By the way, guys, I know some of you listen to the podcast, but you haven't yet joined Tournament Poker Edge. I mean, I can't tell you how big a mistake that is. I mean, for a very small amount of money, you can have access.
It's practically free. I mean, it's really like, cheap. Even if you play small stakes tournaments, like $25, like that's just not that many buy-ins.
No, it's not, and it would really greatly improve your overall poker knowledge, which would therefore improve your likelihood of becoming a winning player or increasing your EV, if you will, if you already are a winning player.
And it's not a commitment. I mean, you play if you hate it, and you're not going to hate it, but if you hate it, you can always unsubscribe. It's not like you're not making a year-long commitment here.
Right. Yeah.
You can. You'll get a discount if you do, but you don't have to.
You can go month to month, whatever you want. You have access to all Andrew's videos and all of our other amazing coaches, Alex Fitzgerald, Daryl Jace, and on and on and on. So much great content.
Matt Hunt is one I've been enjoying a lot recently.
Oh, yeah. He's terrific as well. So definitely get on there if you're not on there yet. So for Andrew Brokos, for Bert, who has finally stopped meowing.
I was like, who the hell's Bert?
Yeah, you forgot Bert from half an hour ago. Bert, He's the cat. And for everyone here at Tournament Poker Edge, I'm Clayton Fletcher. Thanks so much for listening.
Hold 'em like they do in Texas, please. Fold 'em, let 'em hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Luck and intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. I wanna roll with her, a hard pair we will be. While little gambling is fun when you're with me. I love it. Russian roulette is not the same without a gun. And baby, when it's love, it's not rough, it isn't fun. Oh, whoa.